All right, so let's take a look at the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. So remember, we're still under Jim Crow laws at this time, and black and white people are very much still segregated, even down to the schools. So one of the biggest cases that really challenged school segregation was a case called Brown versus Board of Education. And what happened was a man named Oliver Brown sued the state of Kansas because they were making his daughter, who was black, go to a further away black school when the white school was closer. So this is a map of all the states that either required school segregation, forbid school segregation, or had no kind of law related to it. So this is Linda Brown. And when the case went all the way to the Supreme Court ruled that, you know what, is very much unconstitutional that we have separate schools for black and white students, and all states throughout America that require segregation must integrate. Integrate means allow black kids to go to school, white kids. So this case in turn overruled and overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. Remember that Plessy versus Ferguson that said separate but equal was legal. So when this came about, many southern states, one of the biggest states being Georgia, was very much against it. And our former governor Herman Talmadge was one of the people that was very much against the desegregation of schools. So a man named John Sibley, he started something called the Sibley Commission. And the Sibley Commission was basically them going around surveying to see how Georgians felt about integration. And he found that every three Georgians said they'd rather see schools closed than have black kids or white kids. So Georgia, in response to integration and Brown versus Board of Education, they did something that was very offensive to African Americans at this time. They made this here the new state flag. So as you can see, it emblems the Confederate flag, and they just put the state seal right here. So this was our state flag from 1956 until 2001. It wasn't until Roy Barnes came in 2001 was our last Democratic governor. From 2001 2004, this was our state flag here. Now, Roy Barnes was trying to be a peacemaker and the middleman, so he tried to be nice and have all the old flags here, but that didn't really work, which is a lot of reason why he did not get reelected in 2005. So this flag here is our current flag, which is what the citizens of Georgia voted on. So during this time, we see the rise of the civil rights movement. And you all are familiar with the civil rights movement. That's when African Americans were fighting against racial discrimination and segregation. So one of the key figures of the civil rights movement, which you all are familiar with, is Martin Luther King Jr., this man here. And he became a leader of the civil rights movement after he successfully led the Montgomery bus boycott. So he also was a founder and one of the leaders of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC. And Dr. King was very much a person he felt like to get the message across, they should use nonviolent tactics to get peace and get equal rights. Now, John Lewis was another man, much like Dr. King. He was also someone in favor of nonviolent protests and also leading marches. Now, he was also one of the speakers at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. That was the full name of it. And he led over 600 marches across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. So if you ever seen that movie, Selma, is about this march, one of the marches here. Now, John Lewis was, during that march, he was beaten by Alabama state troopers. Now, eventually, John Lewis began a life in politics, being elected to Atlanta City Council and then to the U.S. Congress, where he was serving until he died. So this is John Lewis right here. John Lewis was also one of the chair people of SNCC, or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is basically a bunch of college students who came together and will also protest for equal rights. But they would do a lot of sit-ins at lunch counters to protest the restaurants not serving black people because they were black. So here are some of these sit-ins right here. And you would have white people who would actually hit and physically attack black students who were actually sitting in or protesting. Now, another movement that came to be was the Albany movement. And the Albany movement was a movement that involved the NAACP and SNCC, and it took place in Albany, Georgia. And they wanted to desegregate everything in Albany all at once. So their bus system, the schools, libraries, hospitals, restaurants, etc. Now, this particular movement wasn't very much as violent as far as policemen hitting a lot of protesters, but it was not really successful either. And Dr. King even stated himself that it wasn't really much of a success because he felt like they were trying to desegregate everything all at once instead of focusing on one thing at a time to get equal rights. Now comes the March on Washington, which you all are familiar with. And this is when 250,000 people came to Washington, D.C. And this is where Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. And the point of this march, of this demonstration, was to get President Kennedy and Congress to pass some kind of law that guaranteed equal rights and quality of education to all citizens. So this is the march. Now, Dr. King and John Lewis and all the other civil rights activists were successful, and President Lyndon Johnson, who was president at this time because Kennedy was assassinated, he signed into law in 1964 the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which pretty much said no matter what your race, color, or religion, you cannot be discriminated against. Now, this man here, Lester Maddox, was our former governor of Georgia, and he was very much a person that was for segregation. Now, Lester Maddox, before he got into office, he had a lot of restaurants that he owned in Atlanta. And when it was illegal for us to have black and whites not being served in your establishment, he decided instead of letting black folks eat at his restaurants, he just went ahead and closed them for good. So now he was a very complicated person because although he was very much a racist, and while he was in office and governor, he hired more African Americans than any other governor before him. And he also allowed black people to join the Georgia State Patrol, which is basically a police system, and the GBI. And he also supported prison reform and increased spending for Georgia universities. So that's why I say he was a very complicated man, although he was very much a bigot. He did some things to also seem like to help African Americans at the same time.